Suzanne sat in a beaten leather chair and listened to Ro pace about the barn. They hadn't spoken to each other in a few hours. They existed in the same space, but were completely separate from one another. Suzanne found herself staring at her shoes, unable to bring herself to look at the metal obelisk that stood only a few meters away from her. The thing seemed to pollute the air with a strange cocktail of anxieties. The pillar ahead of her was the rift manipulator, a device that could open a tear in the fabric of space-time, a device that could get Suzanne home. Over the many months she'd been in this parallel universe, returning had been her goal. But now, something just didn't seem right. She had no real reason to feel this way. The device was fully operational, and her two closest friends from this world were coming with her. She should have felt ecstatic, knowing that in only a few hours she would be back where she belonged. Suzanne tried to bury her apprehension by checking the old clock that was resting against the barn walls. Vex, who had left to say goodbye to his old friend Olivia, should be coming back soon. "The location is set," reported Rojetta as she tweaked the rift manipulator's control panel slightly. "Once Vex returns, we can safely travel to your world, and you can rejoin Shadow Wood. Vex will have a safe environment to harness his powers in, and I shall have my peace at last." While Ro's words were optimistic, her tone of voice showed that she was sharing in Suzanne's melancholy. They would be leaving so much unfinished. Frost still had its grip on the alien population of Guildford. Groups like the hate-filled Earth First movement still prowled the streets, and the vicious regime that destroyed Rojetta's home planet still stalked the stars, looking for new worlds to invade. But of all the enemies they were leaving behind, all of the battles they were running away from, there was one threat that scared Suzanne the most. "There is something coming through the rift," announced Suzanne to no one in particular. "I'm sorry?" questioned Rojetta. "There's something coming through the rift," the woman repeated, finally getting up from her armchair. "That's what the luminary said. And that Tyrelect thing? It said that too. There's something coming through the rift, and it will end this world. We've been warned about it over and over, but we still don't know the first thing about what it is. And now, well, now we won't have the chance to stop it. What's coming, Ro?" It was a question that only one person on that Earth, knew the answer to. The thing coming through the rift wasn't a monster, or a weapon, or an alien battle fleet. It was a message. A series of instructions that had been beaming out of the rift ever since Suzanne arrived in the parallel world. At first, they remained unheard and unanswered until eventually, a certain woman whose mind was particularly in tune with the workings of the rift heard what was being said. She began to communicate with the voices, conspire with them. They had a plan, but they needed someone to carry it out for them. An avatar in the parallel world. The messengers couldn't have found a better ally if they tried. Their new accomplice was ruthless, calculating, and had access to a wealth of resources. Her true name was Charlotte Folgate, but the voices, like everyone else, knew her as the coordinator. Vex pushed open one of the barn doors, his arm resting on it for a moment, before he stepped inside. He pulled down the hood of his new brown aviatrix jacket, revealing his eyes, pricked with tears. "So are we off then?" the boy asked. "Soon, Vex. Soon," Suzanne answered softly. "We should probably disassemble the transspatial escape corridor," suggested Rojetta. "At the moment, it's only set to teleport us to the Mount. But if Frost gets their hands on it, then it's likely they will be able to construct a whole transmat network using the escape corridor as a blueprint." "I'll help you out," Vex offered. "I'm in the mood to smash something up now that you've mentioned Frost." Ro smirked. It may surprise you to know that I am too. Unfortunately, for the both of us, the escape corridor requires careful disassembly if we want to avoid rapid pan-dimensional entropy. Well, you know that neither me nor Suze know anything about pan-dimensional whatevers, don't you? Still, I've offered you my services, and I'm a man of my word. I'll go grab the toolkit. Vex began to stride toward Rojetta's workbench, Ro looking at him with a wick of pride as he went dutifully about helping her. Ro and Vex hadn't had the greatest of starts, so Suzanne was glad to see them working together, having warmed to one another over their many adventures. She wondered what the three of them would be like once they crossed through the rift. Suzanne was certain that these last months had connected them in a way that only survivors, fighters for a common cause, could be connected. They were a team. But then again, Suze knew how quickly teams could be broken apart. Shadowwood had been her team, her group of fighters. But then she encountered Project Pyramid and the device that they created. The device thrust her into this world, and Shadowwood forgot about her, replaced her. That's how it felt, anyway. Maybe once their fight was over, Ro and Vex would forget about Suzanne, too. They would go their separate ways, maybe meet up in a pub every couple of years, and that would be that. Suzanne chided herself for being overly pessimistic. Of course they would stick together. They'd been through so much, but she realized that this back and forth could go on forever, and promptly shut the line of thought down. She would deal with the future as it happened, and not waste any more of the present worrying about it. "I'll make you two workers some coffee," Suzanne stated as she walked towards the kettle. The table that the kettle sat on was textured with marks and slashes, physical memories imprinted on the object, left behind by dropped mugs or the corner of a piece of alien tech. Only at a moment like this, where her whole life was about to change, would Suzanne find herself so sentimental over a table. Cold, almost afternoon light spilled in through the window and refracted off the kettle's silver surface. The window was eye level with Suzanne. Its strange position was one of the barn's many oddities that contributed to the shared joke that the farmer who had built this place was drunk throughout its construction. It was then that she noticed a handprint on the glass pane. From the size of it, it was obviously Vex's. Suzanne chuckled at the thought of him running around, leaving grubby handprints everywhere, like a little kid, despite his insistence on being adult enough to look after himself. Suzanne took a kitchen towel from the side and took to wiping the handprint off the window. The smear was persistent, however, and refused to be removed. Suze imagined her dad telling her to put a bit more elbow grease into it, and she did just that. Still, the handprint remained just as prominently as it had before, which meant that either it was somehow impossible to get rid of, or it was on the other side of the glass. Someone had been peering in. Suzanne flung the window open and popped her head out to see a sliver of white disappear behind the back of the barn. Looking down, she saw that the grass that lined the barn exterior had been trampled into a path. The trench was narrow yet deep, caused by many people walking in a single-file line, many people that had now, presumably, accumulated behind the barn. Suzanne opened her mouth to alert her friends, but just as she was about to speak, the far wall of the barn erupted inwards, spraying the interior with splinters and fragments of wood. The now under-supported hayloft lurched down with a heavy creak. "Go, go, go!" barked one of their attackers as swarms of the white-clad men stormed the building, pouring in through the newly formed opening. Purple energy flowed into Vex's clenched fists while he charged at the onslaught of Frost's agents, only for him to be tossed aside with little regard. The operatives didn't care about Suzanne. Ro or Vex, but only seemed to be concerned with destroying the home that the three had built for themselves. The screens of the rift monitor were torn from the wall and stomped into the floor. Shelves were emptied, and belongings were pulverized. The only thing that was safe from their assault was the rift manipulator. It was untouched. The frost forces seemed hell-bent on taking the barn apart, but for some reason, the rift manipulator remained unharmed. Suzanne gazed passively as everything she had worked for was taken from her. She had come so close to getting home. Now she was just as desperate as she was on the day that Project Pyramid tore her from her world. A firm yet careful grip on Suzanne's shoulder assured her that the fight wasn't over yet. Rojetta dragged her through the chaos and into a place of momentary peace. When Suzanne came to this world, she was alone, but now she was far from that. Suzanne could hear the gentle rustling of leaves as the entirety of Guildford seemed to stretch out below her. "What? Where?" muttered Vex. "We're on the mount," Suzanne declared, the hill overlooking the town. "I hadn't quite finished disassembling the escape corridor. I used all its remaining power to teleport us here," clarified Ro. As he went to thank her for her quick thinking, the reality of the situation now hit Vex. "They destroyed all our stuff," he murmured, the energy inside him rising alongside his anger. "They destroyed all our fucking stuff!" The boy swiped at the air, sending a purple bolt out from his palm and into a nearby tree. "Vex, calm down," Susan instructed, trying to stay as calm as possible herself. "We're all going through the same thing here. We've been in this situation before. That night, the coordinator almost killed me. Well, she did kill me for a time. That night, we were so close to losing it all to Frost, but we kept going, didn't we? What's stopping us from keeping on going now, huh? I'm not sure if I want to do this anymore. When you and Ro found me in Alien Avenue, I wanted to be a hero. I heard stories of Res Fenra and his freedom-fighting gearing up to fight Frost, and I wanted to do the same. I thought if I went along with you two, I'd be able to put my powers to good use and do just that, fight Frost. I couldn't tell that Tochal didn't want me to leave. He'd spent all this time looking after me, and he hated the idea of me going out on my own. After a while, I realized why he didn't want me to go. I got sick of all the fighting. I met Olivia, and I realized how much I've missed out. I want to live a normal life, and if we use that rift manipulator, and I went to your world, I might have been able to do that. But now Frost has taken that too. So I don't really know what I'd be fighting for." For a moment, no one spoke. The three stood in contemplation of what Vex had said. "So, stop fighting," ordered Rojetta. "You deserve normality, security. I'm glad you finally realized that." "I can't have it, though, can I? Frost is after us all. Where could I go?" "We could take you back to Alien Avenue. We can talk to Tochal. He'll know what to do," Suzanne suggested. "We'll need to gain access to some form of transport first," Rojetta put forward. Suzanne walked toward the edge of the mount and surveyed the city below. She wasn't keen on losing one of her closest friends, but she knew that letting him go was the right thing to do. Rojetta had been insisting on it ever since they met him. Conflict was no place for a boy his age. That's what she'd say. She was correct, of course, but it was what Vex wanted to do at the time. It was his to join the fight, and it was his choice to leave, too. Suzanne would respect that. The problem was, she wasn't just losing a friend. She was losing an ally in the underground war against Frost. A war that would soon be heating up after Frost's acquisition of their rift manipulator. But there were fighters all across Guildford, ready and willing to rebel, if only they had the opportunity to. Suze was reminded of Rajah Singh, a police officer she had met that was willing to break rank and reveal secrets about Frost's operations. As long as there were more people like him, then Vex leaving wouldn't be too much of a detriment to the fight. "I'll see if we can get ourselves a hire car or something," said Suzanne. "We could get something flashy. Not too flashy, mind you. What do you think about that, Vex?" "Vex?" She looked to the boy to see him standing perfectly still. He was completely motionless, except from his left hand, which jittered manically. Suze rushed over and grasped his shaking hand before quickly retreating her grip. Looking at her own palm, Suzanne saw burn marks. "Ro, something's happening to Vex. He's burning up." The alien woman dashed to her friend's side. "Vex, can you tell me what's happening to you?" Ro asked slowly. "Something's about to happen," the boy breathlessly replied. "Something big. I can feel it. Energy. So much energy. More than I've ever felt. Whatever's about to happen, I don't think we're ready." A deep roar emerged from above, ringing out like the vengeful judgment of an angered god. A cosmic bolt of scarlet lightning tore through the sky, but unlike any ordinary thunderstroke, this bolt refused to fade away. Instead, it grew in size. The fabric of space-time curled and twisted along its edges. Within the lightning, Suzanne could see 1,000 worlds, 1,000,000 different centuries, billions of timelines that never were and never could have been. She'd seen the rift open before, and when it did, the world very nearly came to an end. "Okay, right. We're in big trouble now. Big, big trouble," stated Suzanne, trying to get her head around the severity of the situation. "The rift opened up once, just before I was with Shadow Wood. If I remember right, they closed it by..." Vex cut through her sentence. "I can still feel it. It's not over yet." For a moment, Suzanne pondered what that could mean, but she soon got her answer in the form of a second celestial roar. This one was quieter, and was not followed by a lightning bolt, at least not one she could see. Somewhere else, a second rift had opened. Rojetta, who had already calculated the havoc these openings would cause, began to take slow, heavy breaths, hoping to expel her fear of what was to come. It was then when a third roar boomed down from the heavens, then a fourth, then a fifth, then a sixth and a seventh and an eighth, all in rhythm. Around the planet, rifts were opening to the beat of infernal drums. 16 thunderclaps, reported Rojetta. "That's every rift on Earth, even the dormant ones. I've heard of full rift openings before, but only in theory. I've never seen it happen with my own eyes." "I have, but it was only the rift here that opened, and even that was a disaster. The rifts are a sort of gateway to all of time and space, all the different dimensions too. And now that they're open, loads of stuff from all those places are going to be falling down onto us. Basically, imagine the most awful things in the universe. It's probably going to show up any second now," warned Suzanne. "Frost is behind this, aren't they? That's what they wanted the rift manipulator for," put forward Vex. Rojetta agreed. "Seems like that's the most likely possibility. I'm certain that this could not have happened naturally. For them to cause a quantum event of this scale, however, they must have had outside help. There's a hyper-intelligent individual or group out there that wants this to happen." Suzanne looked at her, confused. "But how does all this benefit Frost?" she asked. "I can tell you that," responded Vex. "They'll use all the chaos as an excuse to crack down on the aliens living here. They'll probably try and put the blame for this on us too while they're at it. Rather soon, this city is going to become a war zone. Suzanne, we need a plan, Ro implored. Suzanne was quiet for a second, ruminating. The plan stays the same, she said at last. More or less. We'll still take Vex to the Alien Avenue, but while we're there, we'll start recruiting. There must be, what, hundreds of aliens living there? And none of them are massive fans of Frost. Why else would they set up a little society of their own? So, when we get there, we tell them what's going on, and we take everyone that's willing to fight back into Guildford with us. You want to gather an army? Questioned Rojetta. Yes. Yes, I do. You don't have to fight if you don't want to. Rojetta rolled up her sleeves and looked fiercely upon Guildford, the inevitable mayhem already breaking out onto the streets. That was the only sign Suzanne needed. From this point on, they were at war. Not in secret, not underground, but real public revolution. First, though, they needed a car. Olivia was working at the cafe when it happened. She was busy, as usual, making cappuccinos, handing out muffins, and what have you. But her thoughts were somewhere else. She'd just parted ways with Vex for the last time. He'd spoken to her about leaving for another universe before, but it never really seemed real. And even though she grew up in a world where aliens and humans lived among each other, the idea of parallel worlds was maybe a bit too sci-fi for her. Perhaps that's why she didn't cry when he left. Vex was a blubbering mess towards the end of the interaction, but Olivia was relatively unaffected. She didn't mean to be. It's just, none of it felt real. For some reason, it was almost like she knew that she was going to see him again. Reg, who was working the same shift as Olivia, was the first to hear it. The rumble. The roar that split the sky apart. Most of the customers, along with most of Guildford, rushed out into the streets to witness the ruby lightning bolt, hanging there above them. Olivia went to join the mesmerized crowds, but was halted by a firm grip on her arm. "Don't go out there," cautioned Reg. "I know you're all hippy-dippy about the aliens, but we're in the real world now. If you go out there, you'll get abducted or incinerated or something. Trust me. The Xenos are jealous of what we have. They always have been, and that's why they come here. That big thing in the sky, that's what they'll use to take everything from us. Mark my words." Olivia shook the man off. She knew that aliens were just as capable of being good or bad as humans are, and they certainly weren't holding any "let's all invade the world" meetings. Stepping outside, Olivia realized just how large this whole event was. Thousands of people, soaked in the light of the opened rift, crowded the roads and pavements. Children sat on the shoulders of their parents. Those who weren't outdoors poked their heads out of windows or pressed their faces against glass shop fronts, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange anomaly. For a while, there was a hesitant silence. Excited chattering broke out occasionally, but for the most part, there was nothing. It was like everyone was waiting. Their attention was taken away from the lightning bolt and to something new. A purple dot, burning with a star's intensity, fell noiselessly from the rift. Many eyes watched its plummet, unsure of the nature of the thing. That was until it appeared to grow. In reality, all it was doing was getting closer. People soon figured out what it was. A meteorite, a rock from 1 billion light years away, now hurtling towards Guildford. It was then that the real chaos started. If the meteor had actually impacted and not just burned up, you wouldn't have known it if you were one of the many that line the streets of Guildford. People clambered over each other, stomping and trampling with little care for anything other than their own safety. Olivia ducked into the cafe doorway, hoping to avoid being swept up in the river of panic. Already, fights had broken out. Nudges turned to pushes, turned to punches. A nurse who had knelt down to assist a trampled boy was kicked aside by a much larger man who himself was attempting to gain entrance to a now vacated jewelry shop. Screams and cries filled the air. Many ran, fearing for theirs and their families' lives, unsure of what would come next. For some, the opening of the rift did not symbolize terror, but appeared to them as an opportunity, something to exploit. Members of Earth First came out in full force, their crossed-out alien insignia emblazoned on every piece of clothing they wore. They pretended to escort the crowds as if they were trying to maintain order. Their true motive, of course, was to transform the fear into hatred. "It's the aliens," they said. "They're the ones to blame." It wasn't too long until people started believing it. Olivia wanted to put a stop to it all, but what could she do, really? She was one person against an entire city that had gone mad. She observed as a girl her same age drew a can out of spray paint from their jacket, writing the words "Xenos out" on the building opposite. The malice-filled scrawl still dripped black down the bricks when it was obscured by dense white smog. Soon, the entire high street was consumed. The crowds, which had dispersed slightly, were barely visible. Ghosts in the fog. Other than that, the only other sight was the open rift, still so bright that it burned through the smoke. At the end of the street, the creators of the smog were about to make themselves known. After tossing one last smoke grenade into the rabble, a Frost agent lifted a megaphone to his mouth. His commands thundered through the mayhem. "This is an emergency situation," he declared. "All human citizens must remain indoors and return to their residences when possible. All non-human citizens must report to Frost or the police. Failure to comply will be met with force." Olivia slipped back inside the cafe as an armored Frost van began to prowl up the road. Reg popped his head up over the counter before standing up entirely. "Oh, thank God," he stated. "Frost is here. Good old Frost. They'll bring this to an end, you'll see. They've got the right idea, rounding up all the Xenos. They'll be sending them all back soon enough. We'll have a cleaner planet at last." The young woman disregarded his ignorant remarks and took her phone from her pocket, trying to get in contact with the people who would really bring this to an end. That is, if they hadn't left this world and gone to another universe yet. Despite her hopes, the phone screen was black and unresponsive. Dead. "Reg, do you remember Suzanne? The woman who worked with us for a bit?" "Yeah, why'd you ask?" "I need to ring her. Have you got her number?" "I do. As it goes. Forgot to delete it. But of all people, why would you want to call her? Don't you want to check on your mom or dad or something?" "They'll be fine. They live out of town. If I can call Suzanne, I might be able to help sort this whole thing out. Pass us your phone, please." "No way." "Jesus Christ, Reg, pass me your phone or I'll come at you with bloody cake knife," she threatened, far more aggressively than she intended to. "All right, calm down, Liv. Here." He finally succumbed and handed her his phone. Almost instantly after dialing, the call ended. Of course, she'd changed her number. After being almost killed by the coordinator, Suzanne, as well as the others, had been trying to stay as off the grid as they possibly could. Olivia would have to find them herself. Once again leaving the cafe, she was met with an entirely new Guildford. one that was almost the opposite of the frenzy it had been a mere 10 minutes ago. The town looked as though it had been ransacked. The shattered glass that carpeted the ground reflected the red light of the rift, causing them to glow as if they were embers, shining through the slowly dissipating smoke. Frost's orders echoed out from the hundreds of armored white vans that stalked the empty streets, stopping occasionally to forcefully detain a non-human or to beat down any opposition. Just that morning had Olivia walked along this high street with Vex. Now look at the place. How easily people fall. Olivia wandered the deserted town, sticking to the few shadows that were afforded to her. The sound of something being crushed caught her attention. Litter, spilt from a toppled bin, was being flattened beneath a much larger weight. The foot of some foul beast that had fallen from the rift, no doubt. She scrambled along the floor, picking up a broken piece of a bench and wielding it like a bat. The creature pushed its pale muzzle out from a gap between the buildings. Olivia gripped her weapon tighter, getting ready to strike the thing should it attack her. The monster let out a deep, continuous rumble and edged forward. Now, seeing it for what it really was, Olivia froze. She knew she should run, but terror had seized her muscles. Her enemy stood before her, with skin of near impenetrable metal and oil coursing through its veins. The monster had not emerged from some hellish dimension, but was forged here on Earth, and upon its side was the word, Frost. 3 men exited the van, one Frost agent accompanied by 2. "You there," the agent cried. "All humans are to remain indoors. Get inside immediately." 2 of the men closed in on Olivia. The agent and one of the officers loomed over her menacingly, their faces obscured, the agent's by his balaclava and the officer's by his riot helmet. The policeman that decided to stay behind watched on, disapproving, but not stopping what was about to happen. "Did you hear what I said, little girl?" questioned the agent mockingly. Olivia's grip tightened around the broken piece of bench. "That wood isn't going to stop us," the agent continued. "The world's going back to how it was, sweetheart. All those aliens are going back to where they belong. You're just a kid. You don't really know what you're fighting for. I think you need what all naughty kids deserve. Some time on the naughty step. What do you say, PC Collins? You want me to bring her in?" the police officer questioned. "Yeah, walk her to the station or something. The coordinator said we have to save some room in the van for non-humans." Olivia swung the broken bit at the agent's leg. The plank of wood was snapped by his rising foot as his knee impacted her abdomen. Olivia hit the concrete, clutching her stomach. "She's a nasty one. I changed my mind about what bad kids need. I think this one needs a beating, the old-fashioned way." Olivia tried hoisting herself up, but to no avail. The agent took his baton from his belt, and the officer did the same. She threw her hands over her face and braced herself. There was a blur, and then a crack. A 3rd baton had been swung into the side of the police officer. The agent, distracted by the commotion, didn't notice Olivia picking up the snapped pieces of her improvised weapon. The agent turned to face his assailant, the 2nd police officer. "BJ Singh, this is unexpected," the Frost operative observed. "I, like everyone else, thought you were a bit soft. Why now have you decided to start attacking your colleagues?" The rogue police officer didn't answer. He was much smaller than the agent and wouldn't win the inevitable fight that was about to break out between them. He wouldn't, that is, if Olivia hadn't dug 2 of the splintered pieces into the agent's side, causing him to shriek in both pain and surprise. Taking advantage of this, PC Singh smashed his baton into the side of the operative's head, knocking him out clean. Singh removed his riot helmet, and tossed it aside. "Why did you do that?" asked Olivia, the pain inflicted upon her by the agent still evident in her voice. "Because it was right and this whole operation is wrong. We're meant to be maintaining the peace. We should be working against Frost, not with them. The coordinator's got everyone on the force wrapped around her finger." Singh paused for a moment. Olivia had obviously come to the same conclusion far before he even started talking. "Sorry. I'll stop rambling. What's your name?" "Olivia. You?" "PC Raja Singh. Although I'm probably not a PC anymore, so just Raja will do." "Okay then, just Raja. I'm looking for some people, but I can't get in contact with them. Suzanne Barry, Vex Robinson, and Rojetta? Have the police arrested anyone with those names?" "Luckily they haven't," confirmed Raja. "I'm hoping I can get to them first. I only met them briefly, but from what I saw of them, I think they might be the only people who can fix this." Rojetta wildly spun the steering wheel of a hot-wired car, hoping to shake off the creature that had latched itself onto the back of the vehicle. Suzanne leaned out of the backseat window and tried to bash the thing with her shoe. "If I had time to grab my pistol, I would have shot this bugger already," Suzanne announced. "You can't shoot it," argued Vex. "It's endangered." "Well, I suppose it's extinct." Suzanne stared into the animal eyes of the velociraptor that had fallen from the rift, directly onto their stolen car. "It doesn't look very extinct to me," she shouted. Rose swerved the car some more, throwing Suze back into her seat. The raptor was unmoved by the motion. It climbed closer to the rear window glass, eyeing up the vehicle's occupants hungrily. "I have an idea," Vex revealed. He reached his hand out toward the rear window, aiming his palm just beneath the raptor's claws. He closed his eyes, inhaled. He felt the energy that surrounded him, the combustion of the car engine, the powerful waves radiating from the open rift. But he needed to go deeper. The forces that bonded molecules, tiny but still energy. And that's what Vex was all about. Energy. Manipulating it, moving it. He'd never done anything as precise as this before, but he'd been practicing. The raptor at first didn't notice what was going on. How could it? At first, the change was only minuscule. One particle bumping into another, transferring energy. Thermal energy. Soon the particles were cascading and colliding in beautiful unpredictability. Every time they collided, more heat was transferred. More heat until it was too much for even a prehistoric killer like the raptor to bear. Its hold on the back of the car loosened, and it tumbled onto the road. Vex sank into the back of the seat, exhausted. "Well done, Vex," applauded Suzanne. "Yes, very impressive," Rojetta agreed. 20 minutes until we reach Alien Avenue." The miles of fields on either side of the road were left ownerless after the establishment of Alien Avenue. People feared the idea of living near a completely non-human settlement, even if it only was the size of an abandoned council estate. So the farmers packed up and left, allowing their fields to become a haven for fly tippers, human and alien alike. When Suzanne had last traveled along this road, she was attacked by vermites, bestial scavengers that lived off the waste deposited in the fields. This time, though, the vermites were nowhere to be seen. Maybe they were hiding, some sort of animal instinct telling them to beware the open rift and the disorder it would bring about. Suzanne didn't blame them if that was so. The sight of the rift was terrifying. It just hung there, no longer growing, simply existing, infecting the gray sky with its scarlet influence. Just in the corner of the wing mirror, a white spot drew Suzanne's eye. "Vex?" I don't suppose you could pull off that trick you did with the raptor again, requested Suzanne. No, I'm too tired. Why? The boy mumbled. Because there's a frost van right behind us. If there's one thing I'm certain of, it's that there shall be more. For some reason, Frost is detaining extraterrestrials. Alien Avenue is sure to be a prime target of their operations, deduced Rojetta. Suzanne, if you're willing to drive, then I'll get out. There must be 5 agents in that van maximum. If you and Vex continue to Alien Avenue, warn them that Frost is approaching. I'll see what I can do to hold them off. Rojetta remembered the war priest standing over the ashes of her home world. A whole planet left in ruins purely due to prejudice and ignorance. Frost's culture of intolerance was identical to that of the regime those war priests served. Ro would not allow Earth to suffer the same fate as Sorvos. No, asserted Suzanne. I won't leave you behind. Although, I'm not quite sure the people in that van would be interested in fighting you anyway. The driver beeped the van's horn over and over. Whoever he was, it seemed like he wanted their attention rather than their deaths. Ro slowly pressed on the brakes, allowing the van to catch up with them. Pulling up beside the hot-wired car, Olivia and Rajah waved from the front seats of the Frost vehicle. The two parties got out and greeted each other. Vex was met with a big hug from Olivia and, to his surprise, a quick kiss, too. You're still here. Decided to stick around to watch the world go to shit? Remarked Olivia, drawing a small chuckle from the still exhausted Vex. I'm not going anywhere. Slight change of plan, Vex clarified. Also, Frost nicked our rift manipulator, so that doesn't help. PC Singh, long time no see. Gotta say, not a big fan of the new wheels, Suzanne called out. It's just Rajah now, and the van isn't ours. We sort of stole it. Suzanne laughed. Ditto. We're going on a big end-of-the-world tour, trying to gather as many people as possible to take down Frost. I suppose you two could come along if you want. That's why we came looking for you in the first place, Suzanne. Rajah has some inside information that might help too, Olivia revealed. Rojetta injected herself into the conversation. Whatever it is, it can wait. The real Frost will be on their way to Alien Avenue shortly. It's only logical. We need to continue driving right away. Ro's right as usual, declared Suzanne. We need to get back on the road. The longer we stay here, the more time Frost has to catch up. Within a few minutes, the two groups were hurtling down the empty road once more. The residents of Alien Avenue were fearful of what was to come, almost neurotically so. Extraterrestrials hurried about the mesh of interplanetary architecture, hoping to gather as many of their belongings as they could. Everyone was too scared to stay, but too hesitant to leave. Some armed men that Suzanne recognized as being members of Res Fenra's militia assessed their vehicles before admitting Suze and her gang onto the estate. They had no time to marvel at their surreal surroundings, instead choosing to march straight on to the large hut that operated as the town hall. The place, which had been filled with influential aliens when Suzanne first visited, was now almost entirely empty. Despite the impact that the unfolding events would have on Alien Avenue, only 3 of its council members had assembled in the hut. Those 3 being Tochal, Alien Avenue's founder, Res Fenra, who was now acting as head of security, and a counselor named Xylords. Xylords, an alien whose body was comprised completely of crystals, noticed the newcomers first. I was wondering when you would arrive, she remarked bitterly. I suppose you've come up with some madcap plan to save us all without a single life being lost? It's too late for any of that business, I'm afraid. Even if we survive this, the world we reemerge into will be unrecognizable. Frost's coup is likely the most organized approach towards this calamity. No one else was prepared for this sort of thing. The opening of the dormant London Rift was practically torn apart the capital. Westminster's in complete shutdown. Whatever response we're forced to make to this, it won't be pleasant. Unfortunately, we've come to the same conclusion, Rojetta agreed. We're here to form an army, gather as many willing fighters as possible, and end Frost's attack on the aliens of Guildford. Res Fenra moved towards Ro with the same gait one would expect from an old military general. An army, eh? Last time we met, you seemed terrified of even the sight of a weapon. Why now are you so ready to go to war? Because... Ro paused and considered whether Res Fenra needed to know the truth. She'd discovered what happened to her home world weeks ago, and still hadn't even told her friends yet. She tried, but she just couldn't bring herself to say it. And if that's the effect that the truth had on Rojetta, God knows what it would do to Res. But he deserved to know. Because our planet is dead, Res Fenra. Sorvos is gone. Gone? No. No, that can't be right. Res Fenra denied as if he genuinely didn't believe Ro's words. It's true, she insisted. The regime reduced the world to dust, a global sacrifice to their god. That's why I'm gathering an army. No more innocent lives need to be lost. Res Fenra stumbled back, his body unable to handle the shock. He looked at Rojetta, his eyes carrying a solemnness, and beneath that solemnness, shame. He'd fought to protect Sorvos from the regime, but he was captured. He chose to run from the war, and now the world he swore to save was dead. Maybe that was his fault. And like that, the shame caught fire, burning into rage. The death of our world won't be meaningless, Rojetta. I still have my rift jump device, and it should be able to take us to the regime's territory. Once we're there, we can start the rebellion again. Just me and you. We'll tear apart the regime from the inside out. What do you say to that? Ro nodded and helped Res back up to his feet. Once we've won the war here, I'll be more than willing to fight alongside you, stated Rojetta. Right. The war here. If you want an army, my men and I will be at your command. That's appreciated, Res, thanked Suzanne. I'm sorry about what happened to your planet. Both of you. What's important now is that we don't lose another, Rojetta stated, leaving with Res to go and ready his men. Tochal hopped down from his seat, his scales shifting to a sandy yellowish color. Vex, it's nice to see that you're still in one piece, he said, trying to maintain a cheery mood for the sake of those around him. They've had to put me back together a couple of times, Vex joked. Have you been okay without me, old man? Well, Alien Avenue has been much more peaceful now that you're not around, but I must say I do miss the excitement you used to stir up. It seems you've done well in the human world, though. Who's this friend of yours? The reptilian asked, motioning towards Olivia. I'm Olivia, a really big fan of your work, starting up this place, calling for peace between humans and aliens. You're a hero. Tochal's scales turned purple with humility. I wouldn't say that, he argued. You must be quite the hero yourself, fighting through all the chaos to get here, and putting up with Vex, of course. I know how much of a challenge that can be." The remark roused a grin from all in the room, except Xylort's, whose stern expression was maintained. "Speaking of putting up with Vex," Suzanne began, "he's going to stay here until the fighting is over then, if it's all right. I'd like your help to try and give him a normal life, away from all this stuff." "It would be my honor," accepted Tochal. "No, hang on, wait," Vex protested. "I want to have a normal life, but I won't be able to have that if there's no Earth to live on. If I stay here, my powers will be wasted. This is my fight, too." "Well, then, you best prepare yourself. Multiple vehicles just past the first checkpoint, heading this way. They're coming for us, just like they're going after all the other aliens in Guildford," announced Xylort's. "But why?" asked a frustrated Tochal. "What do they want with those they take?" Raja stepped nervously into the conversation. "Hi, PC Raja Singh. Well, not a PC now. Must keep remembering that. I might have an answer. This morning we got executive orders from the coordinator of Frost herself. We were told to help the Frost agents collect non-humans and take them to an undisclosed location. The opening of the rift is just the start of their operation. Apparently, Frost is working with this organization that's trying to open up new rifts. Once we go to the location, we were meant to place the non-humans in cages so they could be used for experimentation. Frost gets to get rid of the aliens, and the organization they're working with gets an abundance of free test subjects." "And you just went along with that, did you?" argued an outraged Vex. "You heard those orders and thought to yourself, 'Yep, I better do as I'm told.'" No, I didn't. I'm here now, aren't I? I chose to put my life on the line for this," Raja justified. Vex's eyes narrowed. "At least you had a choice." Now, we haven't time for this," Tochal calmly asserted. "You're right. We're running out of time," decided Suzanne. "We need to get some sort of evacuation going before Frost arrives. Xylort's, Tochal, Vex, the people here know you. They'll trust you when you tell them to leave. You three lead them out, in buses or something if you have any around. Raja, Olivia, and I will help chaperone the crowds. Sound good?" The group concurred and set about the mammoth task. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of extraterrestrials living in Alien Avenue, and every single one of them was now a target. The tension was near unbearable along the perimeter of the estate. Res's fighters, as well as a few volunteers, patrolled the fences, just waiting for the enemy to appear. Rojetta and Res Fenra sat in a makeshift watchtower, reminiscing about the old days back on Servos and planning what they were going to do upon their return. Res exhaled a large cloud of cigar smoke, obscuring Ro's view of the fields ahead. "Those things kill," she advised. The remark stirred a smirk from Res. "That's what they keep telling me. Those things are one of the few aspects of this blasted planet that I actually like. I have a whole cache of them stored in the caves. I don't suppose we'll have time to collect them before the fighting starts." The smoke subsided, revealing a line of vehicles approaching Alien Avenue. Frost vans trundled along the road, escorted by police patrol cars and SUVs. Res gave Ro a look before picking up a walkie-talkie and reporting the oncoming assault. Tochal responded. The evacuation had only just begun. It was up to everyone at the perimeter to hold back Frost for as long as possible if they wanted to assure the safety of the fleeing residents. Res Fenra took a battered rifle from the gun rack and placed it in Ro's hands. She scanned the weapon, its notches, its rivets, before clasping it tight. She aimed the nozzle down at the approaching vehicles. She assessed her environment and began to calculate. She added distance, divided wind speed, multiplied for the angle of her shot. Firing a gun, like everything else for Rojetta, was science. She pulled the trigger, popping the tire of the leading van. The other cars slammed on their brakes to compensate or attempted to drive around the growing pileup. Res, who had taken a rifle for himself, joined Rojetta at the front of the watchtower and began firing upon their attackers. It wasn't long until shots were returned. Bullets splintered the watchtower wood, barely avoiding the two Sorviks. Below, the perimeter patrol rushed towards the enemy, who were now congregating at the entrance to Alien Avenue. The fighting was inelegant and brutal. Frost agents and aliens tumbled in the mud. Bodies fell to the sound of gunfire. Rojetta almost felt like a coward. She sat above the conflict, still at risk, but still not facing the onslaught head-on. Her attention was snatched by a series of growing, buzzing sounds. About a dozen 4x4s teared across the fields, spraying soil in their wake. The torso of a bald man popped out of one of the 4x4 windows. In his hand was a beer bottle, with an old rag tucked onto the top. Ro shot desperately at the approaching vehicle, but her aim was hindered by her panic. Her bullets uselessly impacted the dirt around the trucks, which Ro now noticed had the Earth First logo painted on their doors. Res Fenra managed to hit the bald man, the force of the strike flinging the man out of his seat. Res's shot, however, was too late. The beer bottle had already been flung. The Molotov exploded against the surface of the watchtower, scorching the building's surface. The real damage the homemade weapon caused was the blanket of flames that fell from it onto the ground beneath, catching the nearby structures. That was the final straw that broke the back of the Alien Avenue perimeter defense. Frost vans plowed through the flames and into Alien Avenue, cutting through buildings unbothered by the possessions or people they destroy in the process. The Earth First forces were more discriminate, jumping out of their trucks to beat running aliens to a pulp. Res and Ro were thrown back when the front of one of the Frost vans slammed into the watchtower support beam. Vapor rose up from the van's bonnet, and two operatives stepped out from within. Rojetta scrambled over to the gun rack and liberated two pistols, throwing one to Res. The two loaded their guns and took one last look out over Alien Avenue as its years of merging cultures were demolished by the agents of hatred.
Alien Avenue has fallen, announced Res Fenra. We need to fight through the chaos, save who we can, see if we can help the evacuation effort.
Suzanne lifted an alien child, passing him through the window of a rickety old bus to his mother. Vex placed his hand on the side of the vehicle, sending a surge of energy into its engine. The bus coughed into action and began to make its way out of the estate. Tochal noticed the veil of orange that had settled over the southward perimeter. His town was burning. The flames and frost would soon consume the entirety of the estate.
"Raja!" Tochal cried out. "We're running out of time. The final bus needs to leave as soon as possible."
Singh nodded in response and got to work supervising people onto the last bus out. The 100 or so remaining residents shuffled onto a silver coach, carrying what little belongings they could salvage with them. Olivia stood next to Raja's stolen Frost van with Vex, keeping watch for enemies or any aliens that had strayed from the crowds. 3 figures emerged from the growing blaze and signaled to the pair. Ro and Res were carrying an injured extraterrestrial on their shoulders. The injured being had sustained both burn and bullet wounds during the fight against Frost. It was likely she was a member of the perimeter patrol. The two teenagers ran to the three and lifted the woman from the shoulders of the Sorvix, helping her onto the bus. Tochal, who was in discussion with Xylorts having chosen her to be the bus driver, exited the coach and went to talk to Res Fenra.
"How's it looking out there, old friend?"
he inquired, already knowing the answer.
"It's gone, Tochal. They've taken the entire estate."
Tochal nodded grimly. He'd fought so hard for Alien Avenue, to protect its residents, to strive for human-alien peace. Now all he could do was watch his work burn. Suzanne put a reassuring hand on the reptilian's shoulder. "The bus is packed," she reported. "It should be gone before Frost arrives." "I'm so sorry about all this." Tochal leant against a ceremonial cane, a remnant from his home world.
"I always knew this day would come. Res said that humanity would never let this community survive. I always disagreed. Always had hope. Perhaps that was wrong of me."
Suzanne watched the coach, imbued with Vex's energy, push off into the night. The estate's burning amber reflected off the vehicle's surface. No, it wasn't wrong. Not wrong at all. I've had everything taken from me today, too. But I still hold on to hope. They can't take that. Not if I don't let them, Suzanne maintained. The flames crept closer to the 7 fighters, eating away at the wooden dwellings and the old council houses that made up Alien Avenue. Glowing embers floated onto the sky, now blackened by smoke and night, but still tainted with the scarlet of the open rift. Suddenly, the floating embers were sucked downwards, taken in and choked on by a row of white vans.
"They're here,"
declared Res Fenra, pulling his pistol from his belt and pointing it toward the approaching enemies. Rojetta passed her pistol to Suzanne before slinging her rifle off her shoulder. Raja placed his riot helmet back on his head and wielded his taser gun. Vex channeled energy into his palms, whilst Tochal and Olivia stepped up to fight. Suzanne stared out into the fire, her finger poised tentatively over the trigger of her gun. They'd lost Alien Avenue, but if they could defeat Frost now, it was possible that the evacuation buses would be able to escape. Stopping the wide-scale attack on non-humans would be impossible by this point. Suzanne's dreams of an army taking on Frost would never come to fruition, but if she could just save the people in the buses, at least she would have done something. The Frost vehicles sped up from the blaze, and the fighting began. Suzanne fired upon the vans, but the bullets did no more than scratch the paintwork. A shot fired from Ro's rifle, shattering one of the Frost vehicle's windscreens, taking out its driver, causing the van to veer off course and collide with the burning building. Battle erupted all around Suzanne. Guns thundered, bullets whizzed and flew. Bolts of purple energy ripped through the air. Res was aware of the dwindling amount of ammo in his gun, but he kept on firing. He'd fought men like this before, cowering behind hatred and power. But Res always survived. After every battle, every friend he lost, Res Fenra always lived. There was something about that bothered him. One of the operatives stepped out from their vehicle. Instantly, Res pulled the trigger. A burst of red exploded across the white uniform of the agent as the man crumpled to the floor. The agent's partner, too, exited the vehicle and, as before, like a machine, Res instantly pulled the trigger. Click. Res pressed again. Click. The agent raised his gun toward the old soldier. An eye for an eye. A plume of yellow sparks erupted from the operative's weapon, illuminating the form of his fallen ally. Res Fenra always imagined he would die a hero, that he would live his last moment victorious beneath the setting suns of Sorvos. But Sorvos was gone, and he knew he soon would be too. Yet while he may die, Res hoped that through Rojetta, his fight would live on. He took one last breath and, for the first time in decades, Res Fenra was at peace. Tochal, Ro, and Vex scurried toward Res's body. They, like him, were now unconcerned with the war around them. The agents closed in on the Morning Three. Suzanne stepped forward to protect them but was pulled back. She attempted to resist, but Raja's grip was too strong. The fighting, the smoke, the death tempted Suzanne away from consciousness. The last thing she saw was the agents descending upon her friends. White-suited men grasped Vex. He struggled and swung and called Suzanne's name. She could do nothing to help him. Mumbled chatter and the droning of an engine entered Suzanne's empty mind. She opened her eyes, blinking heavily, adjusting. She was sat on a rigid stall. Raja and Olivia were somewhere nearby, for they were the ones who were chattering. Coming to her senses a bit more, she realized she was in the back of the stolen frost van. Raja and Olivia were sat in the front seats and must have placed her in the cell, which was probably a clever move on their part. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" questioned Suzanne as she pounded on the grate that separated her from the front seats. "You're awake then," commented Raja. "Yes, I'm bloody awake. Why are we in this van? Res Fenra is dead and Frost has taken our friends. I could have stopped them, but you dragged me away. And now what are we doing? Fleeing the fight? This isn't what Res stood for, and this isn't what I thought we stood for either." "Suzanne, chill out," insisted Olivia. "You couldn't have stopped Frost even if Raja didn't drag you away. You were barely awake, and we haven't abandoned our mates either. Frost has taken them to the same place as all the other non-humans." "As far as the rest of the world knows, what we're currently driving in is a Frost van operated by Frost agents," interjected Raja. "So, all we have to do is stroll in, rescue Tochal, Vex, and Ro, and then together we'll put an end to all this shit," concluded Olivia. Suzanne was still furious at her companions, but if they could still take down the coordinator's operation, perhaps all the sacrifice would be worth it. Vex, Rojetta, and Tochal sat in the dark, their battered silhouettes barely visible in the bluish gloom. They, like Suzanne, were also in the back of a Frost van, one which had been driving for an hour since they were captured at Alien Avenue, and was now lying stationary. Vex leaned the back of his head against the side of the vehicle interior and vacantly stared at the ceiling. A clunking noise indicated that their imprisoners were about to open the back door. Ro and Vex both readied themselves to fight, but Tochal motioned for them to stand down. When the doors opened, the three were momentarily blinded by the harsh radiance of floodlights. "Out," an agent bluntly demanded. The aliens stumbled from their vehicle and onto freshly stomped mud. Looking out upon their surroundings, they saw a labyrinth of chain-link fence and, at the heart of the metal maze, the barn. Their barn. Surrounded by white cabins. What had once been the base of Suzanne, Vex, and Rojetta's resistance was now a temporary Frost facility. Small huddles of extraterrestrials cowered in what were little more than cages, waiting to be taken by operatives to be used as test subjects. Occasionally, the aliens would glance upwards at the source of their fear. Standing on an elevated platform, overseeing the infernal operation, was the coordinator. Her long duster jacket and unkempt raven hair flowed around her, an aura of manufactured evil. The atmosphere of sheer hopelessness seemed to pour out from the coordinator as if, somehow, her psychic abilities had swelled to the point where she could mentally influence all in her vicinity. Rojetta imagined that was a possibility. After all, the coordinator's powers were caused by the rift, and now, with the rift being open, those powers might have been amplified. The three were shoved into one of the cages and forced to sit and wait in the dirt. In the corner of Tochal's eye, he saw 4 crystal fingers poking through a gap in the fence that made up their prison. An alien in the cage across from them was attempting to get their attention. It was Counselor Xylords. She should have been driving the bus, getting the residents to safety. If she was here, how many of the other evacuees had been captured? Maybe it was just the one bus. Maybe it was all of them. "Tochal?" Xylords asked weakly. "That's right," the aging reptilian confirmed, finding himself unable to manifest any of his usual words of wisdom or encouragement. An agent walked up to the enclosure containing Xylords and her fellow prisoners. For a while, very little happened. The agent conversed over the phone with the coordinator, who had now left her platform and entered the barn. "Agent Simmons here. 5 non-humans in enclosure 137. All of them currently alive. Test conditions optimal." The agent spoke into her device. Within the barn, the coordinator instructed a group of scientists surrounding the rift manipulator, telling them to go ahead with the test. Vex clutched his head. A painful throbbing sensation crashed into his brain, originating from the neighboring cage. "Vex, what's wrong?" urged Rojetta. A deafening snap prevented the boy from answering. A thin bolt of red electricity materialized in the exact center of Xylords' cage. The area around it became blurred, as if reality itself was out of focus. Xylords backed away into the corner of her enclosure. She could do nothing but watch, as her cellmates too became blurred and distorted by the altering effects of the new rift. Ro was both astounded and horrified. This level of technology was beyond anything she'd ever seen. Whatever group that was developing this technology, once they had fully tested it, would have control over the nature of every universe in creation. The new rift started to become distorted itself as it began swallowing its own energy, condensing and collapsing to the point of implosion. There was a momentary flare of searing light. When vision returned, they saw that enclosure 137 was void of inhabitants. Tochal gripped the bars of his cage and closed his eyes, processing the death of a friend for the second time that day. Test failed. New rift was unstable, resulting in collapse, Agent Simmons reported, before noticing Rojetta tending to the still suffering Vex. Simmons leaned closer to their enclosure. "What's his problem?" she asked. "He's sensitive to energy. Your tampering with reality isn't just harming the ones engulfed by the rifts, you know," Rojetta answered bluntly. I know. I'm just following orders. Let me take him to the sick bay. I can see if we have anything that might make this all a little bit easier for him." The agent opened the cage door and waited for Ro to give Vex over to her. Ro clutched the boy protectively while glaring at Agent Simmons, refusing to accept her shallow kindness. Simmons turned to talk to a member of the riot police who needed help escorting 2 very familiar-looking prisoners. While Agent Simmons was distracted, Ro took note of the stun gun that hung from her hip. "That woman you've arrested? She's the one the coordinator's been after, isn't she?" Simmons asked the officer. "Suzanne something?" "Suzanne Barry. She's, the worst of the worst," the policeman replied. "Well, it's a shame we had to take her here, but at least her and her friends won't be causing us any bother anymore." Simmons was interrupted by the 50,000 volts erupting from the side of her stun gun. The agent dropped to the floor, still breathing. Ro looked rather pleased with herself. Suzanne entered the cage and helped Vex up to his feet. Rojetta once more removed his riot helmet, hoping he'd never have to put it on again. It was at this point when they realized that everyone, aliens and agents alike, had seen the commotion, and all of them were looking at Tochal, waiting for him to speak. He had a reputation for guiding and leading, but so far he had been silent. He decided that it was time to change that. "For my entire life, I've been a servant of peace," Tochal began. "My planet, like all planets, like this planet, is stricken with war and division. But on every planet there are those who want peace. Goodness is an inherent trait of life. I truly believe that. Every single living thing is capable of being good. That's why I have always had hope for humanity. Hope that eventually they would accept us for what we are. As I stand here, imprisoned and devalued to the point where I am little more than a utility to those with power, I still have hope. I still believe that humanity is good. I still believe that there is a chance. But I've realized something else too. I had a friend who fell in battle today. His name was Res Fenra. For a time, we were as close as any two beings could be. Even then, we still disagreed on one subject. I believed that we should wait for peace. He believed we should fight for it. Now I know that he was right all along. Peace isn't just something you wait for, something you believe in. Peace, goodness, justice is something you have to make for yourself, something that must be forged and fought for. I see goodness here, and I see its opposite too. I am a servant of peace, and I am sick of waiting." For a second, the silence remained. And then, the coordinator's psychic field of hopelessness was broken. Inspired by the power of Tochal's speech, the stronger aliens burst from their cages, starting a chain reaction of freedom. The extraterrestrials began liberating themselves, spilling out onto the complex. Some of the Frost agents attempted to quell the breakout, while others simply ran. Olivia, Tochal, and Rojetta stayed behind to maintain the escape, while Suzanne, Rojetta, and Vex made their final push towards the barn. Upon their arrival, they found the barn empty of inhabitants. Steel struts supported the structure, preventing it from succumbing to the damage it sustained during Frost's raid. The only thing that remained from Suzanne's time as the owner of the barn was the Rift manipulator, which had acquired a series of deep, glowing cracks as a result of it being overworked. The machine heaved and groaned. None of the modifications Frost had made to it seemed to be doing it any good. For a moment, they all just stood in the shadowy remains of their home. When they went to move, they found they could do nothing but stand. Their bodies were held by an invisible force, as if the pressure of some unseen ocean was holding them down. Vex looked nervously to Suzanne. The coordinator stepped out from behind the rift manipulator. Her hair hung in tangles over her red ringed eyes and flaking pale skin. The last time they met, the coordinator was composed, neat. Whatever increased her power to this level had snapped her mind. The woman approached the three, circling them as a predator does prey. Her eyes flashed like a blade in the dark. Rojetta managed to push through the psychic influence enough to spit out a question. "Where are the scientists?" The coordinator was caught off guard, loosening her grip even more. "You've successfully opened every flux rift on Earth as well as creating multiple unstable rifts of your own. An operation of this size requires manpower. So, where are the scientists?" "Gone," the coordinator responded in a somewhat jittery manner. "They were unable to successfully create rifts. They failed me and my associates. They became part of the test. Punishment." "You killed off your own men? That's a great idea. How are you going to carry on all this now?" Vex questioned. "The scientists are unimportant. Everyone in this universe is. Everyone except Suzanne and I." "Hang on. What's that supposed to mean?" queried Suzanne. "Haven't you figured it out yet?" the coordinator scoffed. "You and I, we're the chosen ones." "Don't be vague with me. Chosen by who?" "The people who sent you here. The people that have been guiding me ever since you arrived. The people responsible for everything that's occurred today. Project Pyramid." Suzanne attempted to grasp for answers, trying to make sense of her situation. "When you came to this world, they began transmitting messages through the rift," the coordinator elaborated. "Your biodata acts as a beacon across the dimensions. The multiverse is an extremely confusing place to navigate, but because of you, Project Pyramid, Project 35 to be exact, can find this world. Due to my abilities, I can hear the messages they send, and I can act on their instructions." "And you're just a drone that does what they're told, yeah?" goaded Vex. The coordinator's hold loosened further. It was then that Suzanne hatched a plan. If the Tochal speech could counteract the telepathy, maybe Suze would be able to do the same. "That's right, Vex," agreed Suzanne. "That's all she is. That's what she was made for. And she was raised by Frost to be their perfect leader. All her life she's been instructed and conditioned. She's not a villain. She's just a broken child. She's a pawn in other people's games." "I'm more than that. I'm more than that," the coordinator insisted. "Then why don't you do something original for once? Why don't you go against your programming and let us go?" "My thoughts are my own, Suzanne. I believe in Frost." The coordinator was on the brink of tears. The years of relentless work and constant manipulation finally catching up. Her psychic clasp had weakened to the point where Suze could just about move her fingers. All Suzanne needed was to carry out one final strike. "Is that true, Charlotte Folgate?" The woman trembled upon hearing her true name. "I don't know." The coordinator, Charlotte, fell to the floor, overwhelmed. Ro rushed over to the rift manipulator, Suzanne to the coordinator, but Vex hung back cautiously. Ro raced around the device, manically flicking levers and pressing buttons, closing the rifts. Rojetta, you have an impressive intellect, but this technology is beyond you, the exhausted coordinator warned. All the data is here, and I'm a very fast learner, Ro retorted. This brief interaction seemed to spark something within Charlotte, reigniting the flame that had only just been snuffed. The exhaustion, the impact of the revelation, all of it faded from her face, replaced with malice. I'm a rather fast learner, too, the coordinator declared, before raising her palm towards Suzanne, causing her to howl in pain. It was as if the coordinator was poisoning Suze with all the hurt she'd experienced over the years, all the emotional torment converted into physical agony and projected into Suzanne's head. The coordinator seemed to revel in it. Suzanne was right, she declared. I've always been a pawn, always been manipulated. Suzanne is just the latest in a long line of people trying to control me. From now on, no one can tell me what to do. My first original act is revenge, starting with her. Rojetta, despite seeing her friend experience such torture, continued working on the Rift manipulator. At first, Vex was confused by her actions, but understood when he sensed what was about to happen. A scarlet lightning bolt tore through the air behind the coordinator. Rojetta had learned, and she'd improved where Project Pyramid failed. She'd created a new rift. The dimensional fracture tugged at the coordinator, but she was unshaken, hell-bent on her revenge, even in the face of cosmic annihilation. Vex realized where he fit into the plan. The new rift was pure energy, and energy is what Vex was all about. He took a deep breath, raised his arm, and focused. A wave of violet exploded from his hand, engulfing the coordinator and hurtling her into the rift, seconds before it snapped shut. Suzanne, her mind burning from the psychic attack, was embraced by her two closest friends. 6 weeks later, Suzanne, Ro, Vex, Olivia, and Raja reunited at the barn. They had met that morning for Res Fenra's burial, an event which Tochal had curiously not attended. Rojetta attached Res's jump device to the rift manipulator and turned to face her allies. Once I activate this, both the rift manipulator and I will be gone, she announced. I will bury it in the sands of my home world. It won't be able to cause anyone any more harm. From there, I'll do my best to liberate my people, to finish what Res Fenra started. Suzanne, this is your last chance to return home. This world is still full of problems. My universe has a shadow wood. They don't need me, but I think there's still a few things I could get done here. Ro nodded and hugged Suze tight. They said nothing, but somehow they both knew they were ready. Ro said her goodbyes and left in a flash of light to continue her adventures amongst the stars. This wasn't the last time she would see Suzanne. They would meet again, she was sure. After a while, Suzanne was alone. Raja had gone. Vex and Olivia had left hand in hand. But she wasn't by herself for long. A black car pulled up outside, and Tochal stepped out. You weren't at the funeral, Suzanne commented. On my world, we don't have funerals, he explained. We believe that the soul deserves respect and privacy over the time it takes to leave the body, and if there's one man I respect the most, it's Res. That's sweet, Tochal. But why have you come to talk to me?
Because I have news. The government is going through a restructure after what happened. They've created a new ministry of which they've decided I should be the minister. The Ministry of Human-Alien Relations. Because of that, I've been put in charge of what happens to Frost from here on out. Obviously, abolishment was my first instinct, but then I had an idea. What if we rebuild Frost with a new image? Prove that we can make real change. It would be a shame to let their resources go to waste. I won't have the time to personally oversee Frost myself, so I'll need someone I can trust. Someone I know who can lead and fight for what's right. That's you, Suzanne.
You want me to be the new coordinator? Suzanne asked, her mind ablaze with questions.
Yes. What do you think?
Even if I manage to fix up Frost, the rifts are more active than ever after what happened. More aliens are coming to Earth, and which means more humans will decide to oppose them, and on top of that, Project Pyramid will be after me for destroying their experiment. I'll have a lot of work to do.
Well, said Tochal, you better get started.
This has been Shadow Woods, The Brink of Reality, performed by Kaleigh Kirby.